Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Neda Ayed, the Acting Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences here at the Cooper Union, and I'm so delighted to be here this evening to welcome you to the 2025 Science and Literature Ceremony. For those of you who are new to Cooper, we are one of the nation's leading colleges for students pursuing degrees in art, architecture, and engineering. Since our founding in 1859, Cooper has been a place where students come to discover their potential to make things. They design, create, build, and solve problems. During their time here, our students gain impressive technical proficiencies in their disciplines, but they also learn, as the core of a Cooper education, that writing and language provide the most powerful instruments for understanding their work, especially as it relates to the wide world beyond their studio, lab, and classroom. Tonight's ceremony is all about those social and imaginative possibilities that arise from the union of science and art. And also, it is an honor to once again host this special program at the Cooper Union. We're thrilled to welcome a visionary group of authors this evening: Ramona Ausubel, Claire Wahmanholm, and Ed Yong. You'll learn more about them in a minute. We have an incredible moderator this evening as well. My thanks to Bim Adewunmi for leading the conversation. I also want to thank the National Book Foundation and the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation for presenting this program and partnering with us yet again to bring science and literature to Cooper. My thanks also to You and Me Books. They're here selling books by all of tonight's featured authors, so please remember to pick up a copy after the event. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce Ruth Dickey, the Executive Director of the National Book Foundation. For more than 25 years, Ruth has worked to champion literary programs, community building, and the arts. Please join me in welcoming Ruth. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dean Ayed, for welcoming us into your beautiful space. Tonight, we celebrate 3 brilliant honorees of our 2025 Science and Literature Prize. Science and Literature, now in its 4th year, is the newest addition to the National Book Foundation's suite of awards and honors to highlight exceptional writing across genres in science and technology. This program is made possible by the tremendous support of the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. Last fall, we celebrated the 75th National Book Awards, and this spring, we've embarked on a strategic plan that will offer us a framework for the many ways we want to continue to show up for writers and books over the next 5 years. Gathering and honoring great literature that helps us to better understand the world and hopefully to lessen our destruction of it is vital to this work and intrinsic to the 3 books we're honored to discuss this evening. Many thanks to our partners at the Sloan Foundation, especially Vice President and Program Director Doran Weber, who has funded hundreds of authors through Sloan's book program and who believes, as we do, in ever broadening the voices and genres represented in the fields of science, technology, and literature. And thanks to the team who made this evening's program possible: Shreya Bindwali and Swan Griffith at the Sloan Foundation, the National Book Foundation's board, staff, and interns, especially Emily Lovett and Natalie Green, Kim Newman and the Cooper Union, and the team at Really Useful Media, and You and Me Books, our partners in book sales tonight. We would have nothing to celebrate if it were not for the 2025 Science and Literature Selection Committee, a group of writers, scientists, and science communicators who spent their summer and fall reading, deliberating, and reading some more. Endless thanks to Sarah Godarzi, Elizabeth Colbert, Baronda L. Montgomery, Craig Santos Perez, and Joshua Sariñana. Please join me in giving our committee a huge round of applause. Craig, our committee chair, was sadly unable to be with us in person tonight, but happily his fellow committee member, Sarah Godarzi, has generously agreed to introduce these brilliant books to us. Our heartfelt congratulations to our 2025 honorees, Ramona Ausubel, Claire Wahmanholm, and Ed Yong. How lucky are we to benefit from your work and your words. Many thanks to you all for joining us to celebrate in New York, and to the wonderful Bim Adewunmi Bim Adewunmi, our host extraordinaire. We're grateful to the readers joining us in person and online who make up Team Book, and we hope that you'll sign up for our newsletter and visit nationalbook.org to follow along for our upcoming events around the country, including the launch of our second annual summer reading adventure. And now, without further ado, I'm happy to introduce Doran Weber, Vice President and Program Director at the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation.
Hi, everybody. Great to be here with you. And thanks, Ruth. Thanks to our friends at the National Book Foundation at the Cooper Union. For those of you who don't know us, Sloan Foundation is a nonprofit philanthropy founded in 1934, and we make grants for research and education in science, technology, and economics. Tonight's program is part of our program in public understanding of science technology, and I'm going to show you a short video about the program writ large before making a few other remarks. So if we could roll the video, please. Thank you.
Our universe began with a bang. Then Earth formed, and life came. 3 billion years later, that life would lead to humanity. Humans developed tools and trade. They painted cave walls and told stories around a fire. This was the beginning of both science and art, of civilization. Science and technology enabled us to understand nature and to build on it. Art and the humanities allowed us to express our deepest feelings and thoughts. They were two sides of the same human impulse to survive and thrive. But as art advanced and science became more powerful and specialized, the two cultures diverged. This polarization continues to pose a fundamental challenge to modern progress. For more than 2 decades, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation's Program in Public Understanding of Science and Technology has worked to bridge the divide between these two cultures. We bring science and the humanities together by empowering creators, writers, directors, playwrights, and others to tell stories that inspire appreciation for scientific discovery and its multifaceted human dimension. Sloan has supported thousands of books, screenplays, films, radio segments, TV shows, plays, and various media from operas to virtual reality that make science more accessible and showcase the pioneering human stories of scientists and scientific achievement that have shaped the modern world. Sloan's exceptional grantees demonstrate what's possible when scientists and artists come together. They dramatize tales of great breakthroughs and tragic failures, as well as the benefits and costs of such endeavors. Their stories promote progress in human knowledge, inspire the next generation, and spotlight the people often left out of the history books. Because before Neil Armstrong could take his giant leap onto the moon, there was a young woman in Virginia who did the math to put him there. As civilization continues to advance, we'll need both scientists and artists to speak a common language and meet new challenges together. Because science is a primary engine of human progress. It touches every part of life on this planet, from our food and water to our climate and health, and it results from human curiosity, benevolence, and ambition. Now, more than ever, we must support artists with a moral, human-centered imagination to portray the complex and far-reaching role of science and scientists in the world, so that we may apply the deepest and most fundamental human knowledge for the betterment of all. Our universe.
No, we're not going to inflict that on you a second time. So 2 things not in there because it's a couple years old. The film Oppenheimer, which you recall won about 8 Oscars, was based on our book American Prometheus by Kai Bird and Martin Sherwin. And then we have a new program now to reach out to creators on YouTube and, in a way, treat them the way we treat authors and filmmakers and screenwriters, because we think that's a biggest platform in the world. There are a lot of creative people there doing incredible work, as well as a lot of not so great stuff there. We're trying to find, and we're giving awards, and we're trying to fund good work on YouTube. So that's a new program that wasn't included there. As Ruth alluded to before, we make book grants year-round. I'm making, I think, about 20 book grants a year now. So any authors in the audience, you can apply to us directly, where we call them small book grants up to $60,000. But it's on top of your advance, so it's free money. It's competitive, obviously. And just a couple of books in the last year that I'll mention that were published. Let me see the ones I wanted to pick up. Doctored by Charles Piller, The Impossible Man about Roger Penrose by Patch and Bars, and Frostbite by Nicola Twiley. So, and the Sloan Foundation, you should also know, is very good at picking winners. Our signature program is given to scientists early and mid-career, and to date, 58 of them have gone on to win the Nobel Prize. So you should treat these authors today with a lot of respect. Anyway, thank you very much for coming, and I think now I'm handing it off to Sarah Goodarzi. Thank you very much. She's author and member of the selection committee, and thank you very much to all our selection committee members.
For in and out, above, about, below, 'tis nothing but a magic shadow show, played in a box whose candle is the sun, round which we phantom figures come and go. In this quatrain, 11th century Persian poet, astronomer, and mathematician Omar Khayyam writes with the agnosticism and curiosity of a scientist and the tenderness of an artist. His work, which my father began teaching me when I was just 2 years old, was my first engagement with literature that in some way intersects with science. Khayyam, best known for his rubaiyat, also helped devise a precise solar calendar, the basis of the Persian year, which begins at the moment of the spring equinox, 5:01 a.m. local time tomorrow. So it is fitting that we are gathered tonight on the eve of this astronomical new year, celebrated by hundreds of millions, to honor the recipients of this year's science and literature prizes. Good evening and welcome. On behalf of the selection committee, I would like to thank the National Book Foundation and the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation for sponsoring the Science and Literature program, and to Cooper Union for hosting us. Last summer, this year's judges, Elizabeth Colbert, Veranda Montgomery, Craig Santos Perez, Joshua Sariñana, and I began reading more than 150 poetry, fiction, and nonfiction titles. After several months and many late nights, we managed to narrow down the list to 30. We then reread those books and, following careful deliberation, chose a single title in each of the 3 categories. It was by no means an easy task, with so much excellent text produced at the intersection of science and literature today. Our guiding principle was identifying works that exhibited exceptional literary craft with a scientific backbone. In the poetry category, we chose Meltwater by Claire Wahmanholm. Throughout, the author weaves a diverse range of poetic forms with a wealth of environmental knowledge, multi-species assemblages, and climate data. This book brings together literature and science in a way that is innovative, emotive, and compelling. In fiction, The Last Animal by Ramona Ausubel dazzled us with its simple elegance. This novel explores how science works and doesn't work on a social level, and is a tour de force that takes readers around the world and asks if we should resurrect those we've lost, how to move on without them, and to which part of this globe and time period we belong. An Immense World by Ed Yong was our nonfiction pick. This book is an exemplary work of science writing, prodigiously reported and sharply crafted. Like all the best works of nonfiction, it is grounded in fact, and at the same time invites us to be open to the great mysteries of life. The arts and sciences help us expand our world, get us closer to the truth, and challenge the status quo. These books are excellent examples of doing just that, and engaging with them in this capacity has been an honor. Please welcome the authors, along with our host, Bim Adewunmi, to the stage.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Marvelous. I love the accent. Thank you very much for coming out tonight. It's a marvelously lovely day outside, and I'm surprised so many of you would like to be in the dark with us, but I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And thank you and congratulations to each of our honorees this year. Could you please give them a round of applause? So we are going to begin the evening with a short reading from each of our honored writers tonight. We're going to start with Ed. Would you like to come up and... Excellent.
So I'm actually going off-piste and I'm just going to talk about my book instead of doing a reading. For the people doing the live stream, is it okay if I stand here or do you want me to at the podium? Okay, great. Okay, so how many people here are dog owners? Great, my people. I also have a dog. He is a corgi. His name is Typo. It's a good name for a writer's dog. When we go on walks, and the dog owners here will relate to this, I'm sure, there are often these times when we'll be walking along quite happily and he will just grind to a screeching halt and furiously investigate some piece of pavement that looks completely nondescript to my eyes, but is clearly bursting with information and interest to his nose. And those moments, which happen all the time, are reminders to me that even when we share the same physical space, even if we're standing right next to each other, our experience of that space is radically, utterly different, because we sense it in different ways. We each exist in our own little sensory bubble. And there's a wonderful word for that bubble. The word is Umwelt, which just means environment in German. But it has a special connotation that goes beyond just the physical environment. My Umwelt is not this chair, it's not the stage on which I'm standing. My Umwelt is the specific cocktail of sights and smells and textures and sounds that I have access to. And that's going to be very different to the cocktail that Typo has access to. Every animal, and indeed every individual, has their own Umwelt. This concept, to me, is one of the most beautiful and wonderful in all of biology, because it tells us that for all of our technology, our intelligence, our creativity, we are only each perceiving a thin sliver of the fullness of reality. We sit here with this sense that we sense it all, that our perception of the world is complete. But that is an illusion. It's also an illusion that we share with all other species, which makes it a unifying one. It's an illusion that I think makes the world not only seem more strange, but also more expansive. It tells us that wherever we go, wherever we are, even in the most everyday of settings, there are extraordinary wonders to behold, and that the magical always lurks around the corner of the mundane. And all we have to do to experience those wonders is to think about what other animals are perceiving, to think about the fact that the songbirds outside this hall can sense the magnetic field of the earth itself with biological compasses built into their bodies, that there are fish that can produce and sense electric fields that we have no access to, that a seal can detect the currents left behind by a swimming fish well enough to track it, that a bat can produce high-pitched calls too high for us to hear and find its way through the darkness by listening for the rebounding echoes, that a dolphin can use the same sense to peer inside living bodies as if it were a medical scanner. All of these incredible abilities tell us that the living world is just so much more diverse and different to our own experience than we give it credit for. And I think that that allows us to go on these incredible voyages, these incredible feats of travel to alternate universes without ever having to leave our chairs. That ability to understand that other creatures exist in a different Umwelt is a gift. It might well be a uniquely human one, and I think that it is one that we should cherish and make use of. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Can I ask Claire Wahmanholm to please read something from her book?
This sounds okay, right? Okay. I'm going to read. Oh, that's loud. I'm going to step back here. There's a sequence of prose poems in Meltwater that are all called Glacier, and they're all kind of set in this kind of quasi, like kind of real, pretty tangible, lots of details that we can kind of identify with, but are sort of set in a near future of like kind of glacial tourism. In this world that the prose poems follow, there's like maybe 5 glaciers left in the world, and people have these like checklists, right? You can visit. Some of them are out in the wild, some are in the vaults like the Svalbard Seed Bank or something, some are in art galleries, etc. And so the sequence follows this kind of cast of people who has on a quest to visit them all. And I'm going to read the very last one. And the only thing you have to kind of know about this is like maybe 5 sentences in, there's a set of similes, and those are meant to be a visualization of the rise in sea level that would occur if all the world's glaciers melted simultaneously. Glacier. It is everywhere. It is the water I am trying to teach my daughters to float in. It is the sky I tell them to keep their eyes on. It is the air I tell them to seal in their mouths should they slip underwater. I am a leaky boat, but I am trying to answer their questions. As deep as 30 Christmas trees, as deep as 20 giraffes standing on each other's backs. There hasn't been a sea here for 75 million years. I cannot explain that number. My daughter's ankles are sinking into the beryl water. No one can float forever. On the map, push pins skewer patches of icy green like rare moths. I am trying to say it's too late without making them too sad. It's like how you can't take the blue out of the white paint, like how you can't hear your name and not turn around. The calving of glaciers is the loudest underwater sound on Earth. I dip my daughter's ears beneath the surface to let them listen. It's like how you can't put a feather back on a bird, like how the bird won't fit back into its shell. We step backward into the house. I wring the glacier out of their suits. I wring it out of their hair. I wipe it from their faces, but it is everywhere. It is the storm. It is the drowned harbor. It is the current. It is the bathwater that the baby slurps before we can stop her. The horizon rises. It rains. The glacier hammers the roof. The glacier soaks a corner of the bedroom ceiling, which greens with spores. On the map, the push pins hover over green air. The green air is a spreading shroud. The storm surges ashore, mercurial and summer-smelling. We are not accustomed to the sea, so we describe it like a sky. The waves are tornado green and loud. In the water, the polar bears look like clouds. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. Could we have Ramona do a brief reading? Thank you.
Also staying on book. So the only thing you need to know for this scene is that there are two girls. They are 13 and 15 years old, and they have been taken for their summer vacation with their mother to Siberia, where she is on a team of scientists digging for mammoth bones, and they are not happy to be there. So they've gone off on a walk. Eve, the eldest, has been sort of kicking at a cliff, and they hit something, and so they started to dig it up. And at first they find a little, like a trunk, like a small trunk, like elephant style. And so now they're gonna follow that. When the trunk ended more quickly than they expected, and the body attached was small, and they realized it was a frozen baby, it felt like a rescue mission more than a discovery, and they did not stop, but dug until their fingers were soaked and frozen. It was perfect. It was sad and beautiful and perfect, the size of a large dog. Pull, Eve said, and they reached their arms around the back, Vera on the front and Eve on the rear, and they hugged it, this cold body, and they pulled hard, bracing against the cliffside until it came free with a sucking sound, and both girls fell backward. The mammoth smelled of the beginnings of rot. It was starting to thaw. Vera pushed it off herself and stood. She was elated and disgusted, and there was a rampage in her chest. "Is this happening?" she asked. It looked like the animal might at any time open its big eyes. Eve nodded. She brushed her hand over the mammoth's little tail. "What now?" Vera asked, looking at the hole now, that trunk a sea with the breathing hole in the shape of a heart at the end. Tufts of almost blonde hair all around, eyes closed and lashes thick. She said, "We probably should have gotten help." "Now we carry it back," Eve said. It was heavy and cold, their clothes soaked through. It softened noticeably. They would be in trouble for not getting help, and they would be praised for the find, and they did not know which would win out. "I feel like it needs to be refrozen," Vera said, and they walked faster. As they walked, Eve said, "Once upon a time, there were two sisters, but they were not enough for their mother, who wanted a giant mythical beast. The girls bravely traveled to the edge of the world while their mother searched in vain for the animal, which was both real and made up." Eve paused to catch her breath. "One day," Vera said, "the brave daughters were exploring by the sea when out of the cliff's edge they saw what their mother had always dreamed of. It wasn't huge because it was a baby, but when the girls went to it and dug it out, it started to stir. They sang to it, and it woke, groggy from having been asleep so long. For a moment, the only sound was the rhythm of their footfalls on the beach, scrape of rock and wet sand." Vera said, "In the fairy tale, it always gets darker before good wins out at the last minute. And the children are often the only ones to survive." Vera pictured the scene from their mother's perspective. Her on the cliffside with a happy hour bottle of vodka, beginning to worry about her daughters who had been gone all afternoon. The sky faintly pink, though the sun would never set. Mosquitoes starting to come. And up the beach, two girls emerge to their mother's instant relief, and the girls are carrying something, and that something is a perfect baby woolly mammoth.
Thank you, Ramona. I'm going to start by asking what I'm afraid is a very obvious first question, and I apologize for the basic nature of it, but I am as God made me, basic. What is the origin of your books? Why mammoths? Why glaciers and meltwater? Why Umwelt? And I guess the question really is the science, what came first? The narrative that you wanted to tell, or the science underneath it, or, which is what I suspect, was it a sort of intertwining of the two always? And we can start with Ed, if that's okay.
Sure. I have always been interested in the natural world for as long as I've been interested in anything. And I've always been interested in showing people hidden sides of that world that are beneath or beyond our notice. In 2019, what is time anymore? I was, my first book had been out for a few years, and I was struggling to come up with an idea for a second one. I was having a little bit of a crisis of faith about whether this writing about the natural world actually amounted to anything. And my wife, in her infinite wisdom, gave me a very good pep talk about that, and talked about why it mattered. And it was her idea to take this subject and to turn it, and to write a book about it. And she's right about everything, and this is no exception. And I think when we talked, we realized that the topic was full of incredible science, yes, but also just philosophical richness. It would be something that would transport people out of the travails of their daily lives, and that was the origin story of the book.
Clay?
Yeah. I also have been interested in the natural world for like a very long time. My dream career was like as a marine biologist, which I'll settle for like poets, fine. But like, if anyone in marine biology wants to call me to be a biologist, let me know. I will do that in an instant. This particular book I wrote this book mostly after, I was still pregnant with my second kid, but like early pregnancy, and then like maybe a year in the first kind of year of her life. This was 2018 into 2020, lots of, stuff that you could be like bad stuff, like wildfires, obviously, like we're in the first Trump presidency. Fascism is not as obvious as it is now, but it is rising. Obviously, extinction has been happening, climate change. And I had to be like, girl, you're gonna do this again. You're gonna have a second kid, huh? Like, sure. And so like part of the book was sort of a going through of like, has this been justified? Like looking at the world, and being like tallying all the like glacial melt and, tallying all the things and be like, even with that, yes. Even with this, yes. And like looking at the world in sort of in not just a kind of despairing way, but like in a more like, kind of a scientifically kind of neutral way. Be like, is there still extreme delight and like wonder and beauty and mystery in the world? Like, yes, there still is. And I still believe that outweighs like all the other, the other tally. And so the book was like, can it hold like the extreme, kind of the swings of despair and the swings of ecstasy? And like the answer is like, yes, it can, and it must do those things. So the book was sort of a reckoning of that. Like, was this the right choice? Yes, it was. That's where the book kind of came from. Mm-hmm.
So just a simple thing.
Yeah. Casual. Yeah.
Sure.
Easy.
Yeah, great.
Just jotted it up.
Ramona, can I ask the same question of you, please?
Mine also begins with a baby. My daughter, who's my second child, was a couple of weeks old, and she was lying on my chest. We were living in Berkeley, California at the time, and it had been raining for just weeks. Like, it felt like forever. For the entirety of the universe, it had been raining. The streets were like flooding. It was like lots of protests. There were helicopters. It was a really weird moment. So there's this tiny creature lying on my chest, and she fell asleep. And what you do when your child falls asleep, when you are a working writer, is you open your laptop. So I got right to work. She was lying there, and I sort of, got myself propped up so she was safe. And I opened my laptop to work on this novel that I was working on, which was not The Last Animal. But this story popped up about scientists working to de-extinct the woolly mammoth. And I was like, we're doing that? Okay, let's read about this instead of working. And it just felt like this complete like tangle of hubris and sweetness. There's like something sweet about going back to rescue something from the past that we ourselves killed off. We are responsible for a lot of the last mammoth's deaths. And there's like just this tenderness and love at the same time that like every conceivable unintended consequence and the ridiculousness of the size of the project, all of it just felt like it's all here. And what better for a novel than that complex knot? And the feeling of like an individual person caring for an individual creature within that. What would it be like to be the person, the human who's supposed to take care of a creature that's never existed on the planet before?
It sounds like everybody had a sort of a general sort of water they were swimming in, and then a sort of a pinpoint of just kind of like, and now this, which feels like a sort of very human way to sort of think about the world we're living. I don't know. I feel like a lot of times we're told to either detach ourselves completely or to be, all emotion. And I like the combination of both. Which kind of leads me to my next question, which is that one of the things that I found reading all three of your books consistently across all these books, which are very different, not just in genre, but in content as well, is the existence and the power of doubt. A lot of what we think we know versus what we want to believe, a lot of what we'd like to do versus what is right. A lot of kind of like, what is the question if I already have this answer? And sort of like retrofitting sort of knowledge to what's the question I want to ask here? And I think of doubt based on my very layman amateur understanding of science as a sort of central pillar of science. We have to have a sort of question. There always has to be a sort of what if or what if not. And I'd like each of you to speak a little bit to the question of how much space we give to doubt. How much should we be giving to doubt? How useful is it for us? Is it useful for you personally and societally? It feels increasingly like we are in a place where there is very little room for doubt. We are asked to be certain and to act according to this 100% no room for anything else certainty. And that feels dangerous and scary. One of the things I loved reading in your book, Ed, were the footnotes. I kept thinking of A Staggering Work of Heartbreaking Genius. Everyone remember the famous footnotes that went on? And I was like, oh my God, he's Dave Eggers, but better. But I lost count. I started counting how many times I read the word might or may or X person thinks. And I was like, okay, these are my people. Because I also don't know anything. And I'm curious. I like to think of myself as a harmless, curious idiot. It's very helpful. It's a great way to go through the world. Everything becomes delightful as opposed to stressful. And, Ramona, in The Last Animal, Jane and her daughters sort of are on this seesaw of hope versus futility. It could work. It could be terribly wrong. No. Again, very human. And Claire also, like you said, this sort of matching of despair and ecstasy all the way through Meltwater. All I could think was, it's all bad. But I have a baby. How bad can it be? And it kept coming up. So yeah, I wanted to ask you all to kind of speak to this idea of the importance, the usefulness of doubt now and in your work, but also I think societally. Anybody can go. This is free for all.
I think before I had kids, I was like, oh, I know things. Like, I'm pretty smart. I think I know what's happening here. I'm like hot shit. And after having children, I was like, oh, I know nothing. Like, I know absolutely nothing. Which was actually, like you said, like very freeing, to like let go of so many of the narratives that I had about like how either I was going to be as a parent or how the world was going to be to me as a parent or someone who was like bringing children into the world. And it was it was like being kind of born myself again. Like, it was like so much more of the world opened up to me, to experience in this kind of new way. It was really like a commitment to, right, like mystery over the sense of mastery, which has like really been very, very useful to me as a parent. And it's something I try to preserve in my work as a poet too. I mean, like poetry of certainty would be like unreadable. Nobody wants that, and it wouldn't be good. And it's not why people go to poetry either, right? I mean, like, or at least I shouldn't say people, me, like the poetry that when I go to poetry, it's because I'm doubting or because I'm in uncertainty or grief or like or a crisis or kind of a hard emotion. And what I'm looking for is someone on the other side of the page who's like, yeah, no, me too. I have no idea. I don't know, but I see you. And I'm like, we are both in this kind of mystery together. And there's not something you can really fight. You just have to kind of commit and surrender to it. And the world becomes so rich and so beautiful when you let go of a lot of the narratives that you thought you had about things. And you're able to kind of access the world in a much more unfiltered way. And so that I try, not that I succeed in doing that all the time, but I try to get that in my poetry as well and like in my life. Yeah.
I love this question. I feel like I think we think of doubt as like the problem that we have to overcome. There's like hope and doubt, and you have to be like, doubt goes away because it's not helpful to us, and we persevere with the things that we know and our hypothesis, and we're striking off into the great idea, which you need some of that vibe to get some things done. But I feel like the doubt is actually a really important invitation to investigate, to like, just like, what, I don't know what that is. I don't know what's going to happen if I do this thing. What would happen if we opened a particular door to some extinct species? What would happen if we found out what is happening inside of a dog's mind? We don't know. We got to go find these things out. And there's not that I'm making an argument that we should bring all the extinct species back. I think it's very complicated. But as a sort of imaginative exercise to like hook your arm with doubt and be like, I don't know, let's go find out what there is.
I think you are not giving yourself enough credit, Bim, for your description of doubt being a central pillar of science. I think is profound and absolutely correct.
Thank you. I intended it to be that.
That's right. Doubt, I think, is a very useful tool for a nonfiction writer. It creates mystery, which propels people along a narrative. But it's also very convenient for a science writer because it's true. It reflects the actual nature of science, which is often caricatured as a series of facts, but is more accurately a stumbling and messy path towards slightly reduced uncertainty. And I think that needs to be embraced in any work of science writing. In An Immense World, I think one of the critical aspects of the Umwelt idea is that you actually can't fully know what it is like to be another animal. You know, you will never get there. Thomas Nagel wrote about this in his paper about what is it like to be a bat. Like, you just cannot entirely grasp everything there is to grasp about how a bird sees the world or how a bat experiences the world. And which creates a problem when you're writing a book trying to get people to do exactly that. But in many ways, the entirety of the book is an attempt to convince people to make the effort, that the struggle is worth it, even if you won't actually achieve it, which is an argument I seem to be making a lot right now. And embracing doubt and the capacity for doubt is, I think, really a core part of that.
Mm-hmm. I want to follow up with that, Ed, because I again, not just off the back of reading An Immense World, but thinking about science generally, especially in recent times, is that I think a lot of us understand, not everybody, but a good number of us understand that science doesn't promise certainty, but it does promise a sort of continued dogged investigation. Like, we must look at this again and again and again and try and figure out the answer that we're looking to get. And I think for especially my experience of reading a lot of science writing was one in which, like you said, a sort of relaying of facts. This is this and that is that, and never the twain, and don't even ask, or whatever. And I think I understand why lots of science writers wrote that way. It was to sort of like put forth the idea that, listen, this is the correct thing to do. for whatever reason, public health, for example. I don't know why that's come up. But I think the disservice is then that we have sort of like pushed science as sort of like we know it all and here we are. So I guess how do we think and talk about science as a place where doubt is necessary and must continue without giving in to sort of bad faith actors who kind of jump on it to say, well, then you don't know everything, which of course we know we don't know everything, but there is that element of sort of people who were sort of stepping in to say, aha, the gotcha. Yeah. Of like, you don't know everything, which was never the thing that was being argued.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great question. I think this is often framed as either you don't acknowledge uncertainty at all and you give like an answer, which is both wrong and also makes you vulnerable when the truth changes, which it often does. See, basically the entirety of the pandemic, for example. Or you talk about uncertainty and you say, well, we don't know for sure, which makes you very easy to refute, right? It makes you look weak and ignorant, maybe. But I think there is actually a vast middle ground that you can inhabit, where you tell people that there is uncertainty, but you also delimit it. So you show them first why the uncertainty exists, how it might be reduced, and how long that might take. And that's a thing that I try to do repeatedly, like less so in an immense world, but a lot in my pandemic reporting. Like to say to people, we don't know the answers, but not like full stop, but here's why. Like, let me invite you into the thought process of all the people who are trying to like actually solve this, and to tell you why it's difficult so you can appreciate that. And to give you a sense of like what is knowable and what isn't knowable. And we often don't do that at all, right? So it's that dichotomy between either ignore uncertainty or embrace it full stop. But like if you embrace it it's actually like it's very palatable to people. It's not as scary as it sometimes seems. It's not the problem is when uncertainty feels like this big nebulous cloud that hangs over you and it's shapeless and formless. If you say the uncertainty is the size of this room, then there's something you have to work with, right? That's actually understandable.
That's great. Yeah, that's helpful. I don't have that many science arguments, but I will store that away so I can say that. Ramona, I wanted to ask this question. We were talking previously before we came on stage about how much I love the sisters in this book. My primary identifier is that I'm a younger sister. Before I am anything else, I am somebody's younger sister. And there are the cliches that sort of follow in girlhood where some girls are horse girls, some girls are Egyptology girls. Shout out to the Egyptology girls. And my friend Hannah Jewell, who's a journalist at the Washington Post, said, oh, there are also newt girls, which are sort of like nature girls, the ones who really love the natural world, the Attenborough girlies. And it seems to me like Eve and Vera are very much accidental newt girls. They do not want to be in Siberia, but they are in Siberia. And then they discover this incredible thing. And I wondered, in as much as the book is about loss and grief and sisters and all these other stuff, there is still this scientific fact at the core of it. They're undertaking a huge scientific endeavor, and it sort of like ricochets into sort of weird territory very quickly, which it should, because it's fiction. I wondered what your personal interest in megafauna. I know you mentioned the origin of seeing that article pop up, but were you a newt girl?
Definitely, yes.
Okay, great.
But I grew up in northern New Mexico, so there was no water, so there were no newts, but there were a lot of lizards and rattlesnakes and mountain lions, and I was paying a lot of attention to them. I was an only child until my sister was born when I was 8.5. Nice. So I feel like I had an only childhood and then very strongly identify as an elder sister. It's definitely like a core part of my being.
Right.
Always being the big sister.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I would say fauna girl. Can I just be fauna girl?
You can be fauna girl.
I want them all. I want the micro. I want the mega. I want all of it. Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
No, when I was starting to think about this, one of the things that I read a lot about elephants and mammoths, and we humans and elephants co-evolved next to each other. We were really close. Elephants are largely responsible for creating the savanna in Africa. They like knocked down all the trees, stomped everything down to make grasses, fertilized, moved seeds around. And we stood up on our feet partly because of all that open space to like look out and be like, oh, look what all is in front of us. So there's this sense that like, then we moved together north. There's beautiful cave paintings in southern France of woolly mammoths. And then we followed them for meat and for all the things that they offered to us. And that's also the scientific argument for bringing them back, is that the Arctic the permafrost is melting quickly, and if we could clear out all the trees and brush and get the elephants to stomp and seed and get that grass to grow thick again, so because it's thinned, because it's got all this tree cover that's blocking the sunlight, if the grass grew nice and thick, like a big cozy blanket, then the permafrost would melt less quickly. And so we need to repopulate all of the Arctic, and Siberia is really, really, really big, so we're going to need a lot of mammoths. But that's the scientific argument. So it's sort of like this like love story between humans and animals, and then this sort of question, this what if of could we do some good by bringing back this creature that we also just think is really cute? They're like the golden doodle of pachyderms. Like, who doesn't want to snuggle a woolly mammoth?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
I'm not ashamed to say, once I started reading the book, I was like, what would a baby? And then I was lost to the world.
Yes, exactly.
Like no dinner, child crying, and I'm like, 1 second,
like,
I gotta look at this baby mammoth for a little while. That's entirely. I love the idea of that. What I love about this book is sort of the promise of maybe that we could do this thing. And it might work, might not, but it might. And the bigness of the idea, I think, is a huge part of what is attractive about the woolly mammoths. And I also love that it was teenage girls who found it, because I feel like teenage girls lead the world in everything, and then they get denigrated and then discarded. But these two girls found a mammoth. Fictional, yes, but still something to remember. Claire, I wanted to talk about Meltwater specifically. I did a very dramatic thing. You know, when someone is singing really well and you sort of like throw your shoe at them. When I was reading Meltwater, I threw the book. I mean, I was like, oh my God. Like, I gasped a number of times. Very telenovela. I was exquisite. But it is full of these bangers, which is, again, not the right word for poetry, but they are bangers. The one that really sticks in my head is the one called Poem That Cries Wolf, which starts, I mean, I'm going to let you buy the book after this, but you should read it. It's stunning. And there's a line in there where you write, I who am the boy crying for witnesses against my own rabid imagination, which feels like shorthand for the climate crisis, for how we interact with the climate crisis and how we interact with the reporting of the climate crisis. I think for a lot of people, it feels so big, so vast, so close and yet so far. And that makes it sort of bothersome for us to sort of hold in our hands and in our minds. And one of the things that comes up in this poem, but again happens all through the collection, is the use of children as sort of the vehicle for which to have a sort of idea about the despair or the ecstasy. It comes up again and again. Also, there's a lot of death and birth happening in the book. Unsurprising now that I know that you were pregnant and then had a small child when you were writing it. Can you talk a little bit about the utility of children in Meltwater, but also in your other poems as well? I think they come up very strongly for you, and I wondered what was behind that.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if this will answer your. We'll see if this answers your question. It's interesting. I actually think of the book. I mean, I think a lot of people think of the book like they look at the cover and they read it and they read some stuff about it and they're like, oh, this is an eco poetry book that has like children in it. And to me, it's like primarily a book about parenthood that has stuff about eco stuff in it. So the question for me is like, if you're going to write a book about so less like if you're writing a book about eco, kind of concerns, what are the children doing here? It's more like if you're writing a book about early parenthood, what is extinction and, eco-catastrophe and plastic, what are those doing here? Because you could write a kind of a cozier, maybe narrower, more domestic book about that, and many people have, and they've done it well. And so why kind of expand outward and do so much of this kind of micro and macro sort of scope thing? And I think the thing I first noticed when I brought my babies home was just how permeable I was, just how it's a really good, if you're looking for something to do, a really good way to experience ego death, right? Is having children, just do that. It's a quick weekend sort of situation. But how porous I became and just how much of myself kind of disappeared into not in a bad way, in an expansive, amazing sort of way, which was extremely disorienting and then reorienting, right? And then it was happening with me and the children, and then it didn't stop there. It started happening with me and everything. And I was like, oh, everything is also part of me. These glaciers are also just kind of melting into me and into my children. And all this, it's it sounds well, never mind. That doesn't matter. I haven't done LSD, but it's it sounds like that kind of expansive, very much it's all one, which it is. But that was, and so it's you can't write a book about children without having the glaciers in there and without having the plastic in there, right? The plastic is in all of our bodies and has been before we were born, right? There's plastic in breast milk. There's no way of getting around the microplastics. And just how much of a web and how enmeshed we all are, which is terrifying and also extremely beautiful and poignant and tender. And so I think that that enmeshment was a big part of the book for me. Yeah.
I think we don't have a lot of time, so I have a few more questions. We're going to rush through these. One of the things, again, alongside the doubt that I noted in all three of these books is the passage of time in all of them. In An Immense World, there is so much scholarship. People who have dedicated their lives to one tiny being, one tiny animal, for years, and they have thoughts and feelings about them that I can never even imagine having about, for example, some sort of creature that lives in a place I've never thought of or imagined. And there's also what I love also about the length of time is that there is then subsequent changes in knowledge and methodology. What was sort of agreed upon before was sort of no, that's not true anymore, or it was never true, or whatever. The same thing with the glaciers. There is inherent in them is the life cycle. Meltwater is natural, and yet it is also this dire warning that, hey, we're doing something wrong as well. And with The Last Animal, it's not that long, the scope of the book. There's lots of going back in time, and I love when Jane is talking to them about their father. It feels like a time capsule. It's deeply evocative. I was so into that. And I just kept thinking about a lot of us are thinking about time right now in 4-year blocks. Perhaps, some say. What I'm asking is, can you all, as deeply thoughtful human writers, look into your own personal crystal balls and tell me what you see with regards to science and literature and the intertwining of both for the next 4 years and beyond? And this is, again, because I like to be clear, the shorthand of that question is, are we doomed? No pressure. Anyone can take this. No one wants to take it. I love it.
No, I can take it.
Okay, great.
All right. So I don't want to. I guess I don't want to sidestep around the thing that we're all talking about, right?
Sure.
The scientific infrastructure of this country is currently being sledgehammered to death, and I think the changes that have already happened, let alone the ones that are going to happen, are going to be, if not irreversible, then very difficult to reverse. Right? This is not a thing that you just flip back in 4 years' time. I think it is important to understand that because we live in a different world now than the one we lived in December. And yet, all the things that we care about, that the things that animate our work, are still here. and are still worth fighting for and writing about and caring about. I think about this in a few different ways. Like talking to a lot of people who are in the academic space and in the scientific world right now, one thing I hear a lot is that that people feel that the events that are currently happening, the dismantling of US science, is the result of growing distrust in science, and that doing a better job of communicating the value of science would be a remedy to that. I think that is just not true, because what is happening now is not the result of people taking a calculated look at the scientific enterprise and finding it wanting or not understanding it. What is happening now is because science and education are deeply inconvenient for tyranny, because a populace that better understands the world is one that is very hard to govern through authoritarian rule. And what often gets described as being anti-science, I think is more accurately described as being pro-power or pro-profit. And I think that framing helps us to better understand who our opponents are and how to fight them. So this is sort of a very tangential answer to your question, but I think it's at the heart of what I'm thinking about in terms of the future. Like things are different now, and we have to get used to that. But we also have to recognize like what and where and against whom the fight actually is.
Thank you.
Yeah, so good. And I was like, I mean, very similarly, like the questions that art and science both ask are like kind of what if questions. Science like, what if our understanding of this has been wrong? What if the model isn't quite right? And art is like, what if we could imagine better? What if we could live differently, et cetera? And fascism hates those questions, right? Like, so it's, you know, like the thing that we can do is keep asking and like persist in asking those questions in the next 4 years, you know, and hopefully that will get us through a little bit of it. Like to your main question, like, are we doomed? Like my answer, it's a wild, like my answer has to be no, just by like default, because like the kind of, I don't have, religious faith is not really in my idiom, but as I've gotten older, other kinds of faith have like sort of come in a little bit. And if my primary spiritual practice is raising children, which it is, like despair is not an option. That is not part of the vocabulary that you get to do. There are like, if you ask some religious people, it doesn't work for all, but some are like, oh, like there are certain, you know, kind of moral codes that I follow, and it makes it very easy to not be tempted to do things like, no, I don't have to struggle with that. It's just not a thing I'm allowed to do. Similarly with despair, like before I had kids, I would have been very easy to give into that and just kind of like surrender to the abyss. And it's not an option anymore, which is very freeing in some ways. So there's certain other kinds of faith that have sort of crept in. And I also just like do have faith, like there's not an administration or an empire that can efface like what is best about humanity, right? Which is this like artistic insight, this like questing to understand the world and to understand it better and kind of more granularly and with more emotional truth. Like that's not, like art and science are like the first things we did as people. And like that's not a thing that you can erase. And so I have faith also in like the best of us will triumph over the worst of us in that way. And like I have to like wake up and think that every morning. Like right. It's not a choice, really.
Right, thank you.
The environmental writer David Orr says, hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up. And that always feels like something that I come like, yeah, this is work. We are here to do what we could do in all of the possible ways that we have to do these things and to be awake to it and talking to each other about it and learning and asking those questions and to stay in love with the world, even when the world is complicated and sad a lot of the time, like all of it. The world is all of it. When you love something, you don't get to be like, I take just the easy, convenient, I just want the waterfalls and the monkeys, nothing else, please. It belongs to all of us, and we belong to it, and we're all in this together, and we gotta keep meaning it. I think we have to not turn off.
That's great.
And can I?
Thank you all so much for those incredibly thoughtful. I knew you were going to do that. That's why I asked the question.
Can I just say one more thing?
Yes,
in
please.
Response
Yes.
to that? I love the fact that Ramona talked repeatedly about doing this together, right? And I think so I'm a birder, and in January I was out birding and thinking to myself, like, is this really the best use of my time? Like, you know, when people say, what did you do when the US fell to fascism? I was like, well, when I'm looking at birds. But yes, I did. You know, in the words of one great friend, Rahul Haley, it's so important right now to be out in the world. Like, fascism thrives on fragmentation. It thrives when we are isolated, when we retreat into ourselves. And anything we can do to resist that is itself an act of resistance. Being out in the world, understanding the natural world, like enjoying it and embracing each other and being in community with each other, is how we get through this.
Thank you very much. I was thinking one of the questions I didn't get to ask was sort of like understanding climate grief and climate worry as sort of the difference between grief and mourning being sort of like the insular version of, and grief being sort of the outward action, and to understand grief as a call to action, and not just a sort of feeling of despair and despondency. One of the things I love thinking about is sort of delight doesn't get to exist without despair. And that's a thing that I think about a lot and have done work on. And I guess joining with the panel to sort of say that is an exercise that everybody can practice. Choosing to find delight in the light of despair, in the dark of despair, is a very useful way to sort of navigate. Nobody asked me for that, but that's my tip to you. And on that note, I'd like to say thank you very much to all three of the prize, the winners of the prize. Ed Yong, Claire Wahmanholm, and Ramona Ausubel. Thank you very much. I have to thank specifically the National Book Foundation. Thank you for holding this event. Thank you for finding these books. Thank you to the committee for selecting these books. Thank you to the Sloan Foundation, without whom obviously we would not be here. And thank you, of course, to our incredibly graceful host, Cooper Union. We are very, very grateful to be here. Now, once you step outside, you will find the You and Me bookshop table outside. Please buy each and every one of these books. They are stunning, and they really do the thing that you want a book to do. They make you think, they make you slow down, they make you ponder, they make you imagine. And I think, especially now, but always, the power of your imagination, limitless and so useful in the darkest of times. So please go outside and buy these books. And if not here, another place. Go find them in the brick and mortar store. Support your local bookstores. It's terrible out there. Please. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening.